All right, everyone, we're live. Justin, great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, good to be
Appreciate
here.
everyone listening in. I've got Justin Dilley here, Justin from MRI Software, and also the author of the Multifamily Weekly newsletter, which I find to be really fascinating, and I appreciate you putting that together. For everyone that has not followed it, it's a helpful bite size snack size of all the big kind
Yeah,
of headlines that are going on, and it's really easy to keep tabs on what's going on within the multifamily. So I appreciate you doing that for all of us because it's super helpful. So getting to hell yes. So as we talk about every single week, we chat with folks that are sales leaders in the multifamily space, both in the internal and external sales leaders, and looking to figure out, just to have a conversation around what getting to hell yes looks like. And getting to hell yes can be a little bit different for everybody, but has a lot of common similarities as we kind of further our conversations and get deeper on our dive. And it always starts with a problem. And so before we kick it off today, anyone that's listening on the comments, please add comments as you're going along. Appreciate that very much. That adds a ton to the show and helps everything get a little interesting. As always, this is brought to you by IRCX, where IRCX is AI remote maintenance software for property management industries. So if you're tired of spending money on blind trips and rolling out your maintenance crew, we help out with that. And again, like I said, folks listening, you're welcome to ask questions. We love the engagement. If you're listening on the podcast, there were some comments in there as well. We love to kind of get back on those as they come up. All right. So as we always kick these things off, Justin, appreciate you taking the time today to kind of share with everybody a little bit about your background, how you got started in this role, and then what's the problem that MRI solves.
sure. Well, thanks for having me. Good to be here. I like the concept of the show, the episodes I caught. I've got value from. I ended up in this industry not by design. I have a background in teaching, a background in performing, presentations. Kind of led me into sales. I did do a little bit of a stunt as a part-time leasing agent in Boston during my grad school days. But yeah, I ended up kind of learning the industry as it was kind of growing. So I started with a PropTech company before there was the words PropTech. It just was software.
Right.
So it was your PMS software, your property management software. Anything else didn't really exist. So they were just sort of kind of beginning those iterations. And I ended up at MRI. I'm jumping ahead over many years, but I ended up at MRI specifically to help connect the multifamily industry to MRI more. I think the MRI is huge. It's a 50-plus-year-old company. It's all over the world. That we have the lion's share of like a lot of real estate software in the UK and Australia and Asia. And in America, in a lot of spaces, it's popular for commercial in some places. It's popular for HOA in other places. And over the years, there had been a kind of a misconception. I think that getting to a hell yes is easy when you're coming into something that's already validated. But if you've been something that's been around for a long time, I think for MRI, the challenge is always to say, well, you knew MRI in 1970, or you knew MRI in 1989, or you knew MRI in 1999, or whatever. Like, it's what is it today? And so I think in this industry, you have a lot of people that have been in it for a long time. And so whatever their perception is kind of, it's like a fossil. And so it's like, oh, well, I used to use this product back on this site on this day. And so a lot of times the newer stuff is often more sexy, or it's more go-to-market is spent on it, frankly. And so that's kind of my role at MRI, is to help kind of re-shine a light onto something that has been evolving this whole time. And to answer your question about what problem it solves, at the highest level, it solves closing the gap between a real estate visionary and their vision. So it's just narrowing that gap. So what they want to build, what they want to accomplish, what they want to streamline, what they want to reduce or cut or expand, MRI has an ecosystem that can help shrink that gap and get them closer to it, whether they're using it for their full kind of suite of products, or they're leveraging a couple products that integrate into some other really great tech stacks.
So would that be like specifically for developers or operators or managers or owners or like you're to say everything?
I mean, and I hate that answer, right? When you ask like, yeah, an operator, like, what's your vertical? What do you work at? Oh, we do it all.
Yeah.
I would say it's more geared towards operators.
Yeah.
The most value can come from an operator.
Yeah.
But there's going to be value to a resident. There's going to be value to a developer. There's going to be value to someone that's in finance. There's value all over the place, but I would say the people that are in the day-to-day, whatever level they're at on site, day-to-day C-suite, day-to-day, board, those things are very valuable. MRI provides them with value.
So then is it a data aggregation? So I'll just keep guessing here because vision to value is hard to kind of visionary to vision, and value is hard to unpack or at least put it in a category. Like, is it connecting data from different places to make it easier to make decisions? Is it a monitoring software? Is it a predictive software? Like, what is it? Is it marketing? Is it ILS? Is it operations?
Yeah, it's not so much ILS, but it's a lot of the other things that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So the data that you're tracking, whether you're tracking it for risk, prevention, mitigation, mm-hmm. whether you're tracking it for some kind of communication, whether you're tracking it for finance or some kind of accounting piece, the data that you're tracking gets put into our data lake, and it's an open and connected data lake, so that other people that we would see as maybe quote unquote competitors, mm-hmm. We want them in the lake too, so that as a owner operator, as a customer, the data is truly yours. The water in the lake is yours. MRI is just the hole that's there. So you're able to then go and piece the type of reports that you want using a lot of the tools that we have that's using built off of Power BI, those kind of things. That's in your fingertips. So to realize that vision, if you need to see certain things, if you want to understand certain trends, if you need certain kinds of analytics, mm-hmm. MRI has a great platform that can then help you get closer to that, because you're pulling in data from all this stuff. Now, is everything perfectly integrated? Is everything perfect? No, because it's a constant evolution. We're still learning about AI, just the way the industry is learning about AI. Yeah. We're still being able to, export and import data off of systems that have been, modernized or not modernized, not just within the MRI ecosystem, but within the PropTech ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, because the PropTech, property systems, mm-hmm. have varying degrees of maturity. Like, you have some that are still client server, you have some that are all cloud. Of course, there's lots of large language models conversations that are happening right now. So the data is largely non-homogeneous. Like, it's unstructured, it's non-homogeneous. So it's very difficult to bring it together to make decisions. And so there are solutions out there, right? So how do you, mm-hmm. so the data lake concept, for those that are, and correct me if I get this wrong, but data lake concept kind of dates back to a couple, I'll say pre-OpenAI, just so there's a time that people can kind of figure out where things split. So conventionally, you would have software data that comes in from different systems into, and structured, unstructured data. It would go into a data lake. The data lake, you would then use it to kind of collect as much data as possible. And there's a lot of jokes at the time about you just threw all your junk in the lake, and you'd hopefully some stuff come out that would be valuable. And then you'd go and mine that lake for data. And the beauty of the data lake was that data was like 80% ready for consumption. It was largely in one place. It was secure. It was, it was encrypted. It was all available. So very, very raw. And then it required a little bit of extraction to a Power BI or other applications, so you can be able to schedule and pull the software or the data lake, the data source for insights. And then things changed when OpenAI was launched. And we went to this large language models, because large language models, I guess conceptually are fed off of a data lake, but they're not really marketed together that way. And so how do you guys separate the concept of a data lake versus a large language model?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of education in general that this mm-hmm. that needs to be in the space. And so MRI tries to educate while also kind of market what they're doing, right? So I think we're leaning more towards the language model, because that's the most pedantic way that people can access it. Not necessarily understanding the structure completely, but if I can go in and do a prompt and say, hey, how can I pull a report on this, and just do it from AI versus having to actually do the report. And anyone who uses Salesforce out there knows the frustration in that. So that's changing the whole game, not just in terms of the type of data you can get, but also in terms of the type of training that you have for a highly turning over leasing agents, management. You don't have to train people on these complex systems anymore. Like, oh, I don't know how to do that report. Oh, I don't know. You can ask an agent that are built like the ones that they're building at a MRI to do those reports and pass them up, and you're getting that data just as quick.
So then, like a prospect that you'd be looking for, there's got to be some sort of complexity in their system for them to want to try and solve the problem of data aggregation. So presumably they've got a certain amount of units. Like there's something that's going to be complicated about their business. Here's the kind of like the hyperbole. Let's say they've got 1,000 units. They run one region. They're in one district, one system, one operator, one owner. Doesn't sound like they need a data lake to me. But someone who's got like 1,000 units, I'll say 10,000 or 100,000 units.
Yeah.
You've got like 15 different owners, 15 different operators. That sounds like where data starts kind of like leaking all over the place. Is that, am I guessing right?
I think that's fair. I think the misconception though isn't just that it's stored in one place and kind of grabbing in data that's not connected and connecting it. It's also then being able to shape that data, because it's like you said, if you just gather all your data and you have it in a whole bunch of reports, that's great. But I think the point, and I don't know who said this at what conference, I think it was Retcon, but somebody said it, and it was, we don't care about your dashboards. It was from an operator. We do not care about your dashboards, which is so true, because they know what they want. And, one company versus another company have different owners, different interests, different kind of goals in the next, in their next fiscal year. So they want to be able to find and access the data and organize the data they want. I mean, I've been in this industry a long time. I will say, working on the PropTech side, the biggest ask from operators, well before even apps were around, was, can I just have the raw data so I can then go in and do stuff with it?
Yeah.
So now it's giving the tools so that someone can actually just go do stuff with it.
Like there used to be the world where everyone was seeking the single version of the truth, but now everyone's seeking the single source of the truth. And the difference being that previously you had a report that came out of the system, and that was the version of the truth, but that wasn't good enough to manage. Like it wasn't managed in this day and age. So the comments you get, the questions you get is, can I just get the data, please? And then I'll figure it out from there.
Right. Well, data without context doesn't mean much. So if someone needs to run a report and there's a particular ownership group that has X number of assets, X number of units, and there's something specific going on with them, whether it's based on a loan or a legal case or something, there may be a case to actually have data that's isolated that way and to look at it in a certain way. But if you're just trying to run regular reports that don't kind of have the context around it, it's only so valuable. So everybody needs this. Like whether you're 1,000 units or 100,000 units, in some aspect, you need some kind of tool. Are there other ones other than MRI that could help you? Sure. I think the difference is that MRI is only a piece of the puzzle for a lot of folks. You don't have to use every single thing in MRI to get the value out of this. You could use a couple things, use Yardi, use Entrata, and then still get a lot of value out of like having a really kind of cutting edge a data tool.
Well, I think what's interesting about, like, when you go look at your site, the MRI site, you become very aware that this is not just a single play solution. Like, Forever 21 popped up. Like, obviously there's retail interactions, there's commercial interactions, there's all sorts of stuff in there, right? So like being horizontal comes with its own benefits, and that you can sell to anybody, but it comes with its own complications. And as you mentioned in the opening of the show, like you're kind of your role is to I'll say not redefine, but to reposition or remind positioning around pre-existing assumptions of what MRI does or did.
Right. I mean, MRI has a robust, commercial base. So, the most common thing, if I'm standing at a trade show, if I'm networking somewhere and I'm saying MRI, the most common thing that I'm going to, get is, oh, are you guys residential? Aren't you guys commercial?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, there's been a lot of success in that. But as any kind of developer, anywhere will tell you in the last, especially post-COVID years, the lens between commercial and residential has never been like the divide has never been closer. So now a lot of residential folks are taking, steps the way that commercial properties do. There's a lot more mixed use communities than before. There's a lot of different ways to kind of manage your data or kind of structure your software solutions. And so I think the most innovative folks, the clients I work with, are looking at all the options and really figuring out how they can build a tech stack. Sure, do they want, a single source, or they want a single experience? A lot of them do. But then they might do something and realize, hey, I need something more than this for this one particular function. What can I get outside of my main property management software that MRI might have or another company might have? And then how can that fit in?
So then for those that are like your primary targets in multifamily specifically, like how would you characterize them? Like what's your filter? You got ALN or Yardi Matrix or whatever in front of you, or CoStar. How are you starting to filter on? I mean, it'd be a better way to put it. You've got you're going to Retcon, you've got 1 day there. Mm-hmm. So what are the customers you're making sure you have to see, or the types of customers you have to see?
Sure. So, I mean, for me specifically, like I handle large strategic accounts. So I have a set book of like the business that I manage, that I work with to make sure customers are happy. In general, teams that I work with and on and alongside, we're focused on companies that are going through some kind of transition point, which is most of them. And then it's figuring out what that transition point is. Have they merged with another company? Have they expanded their footprint? Have they reduced their footprint? And figuring out the why behind that as we're entering into those initial questions. Because again, if I came up to you and said, hey, what's your vision for your company? No one's going to tell you that. But not in the way that may be the most helpful to sell. Yeah. But if you're looking at the actions that companies are taking, or regions are taking, or groups are taking, then you can start piecing together and ask better questions that lead you to knowing what their vision is, right? So it's like, oh, this is your vision. You're trying to centralize. So MRI has products that are great for that. They have products that are not great for centralization. So it's like, it's like knowing what to pitch when. I mean, a lot of things, like I cover a lot of products. I don't cover all the products. So that's the other thing is, hey, if someone wants to use our, footfall analytics, which is tracking like the moving space, like people moving through space, often, we were just used in, the stadium for the Green Bay Packers, right? So we're just being used. That software was being able to track that on draft day. But retail people use this. Now we're getting residential folks that are wanting to be able to do this with their amenity spaces, plus the mixed use spaces that they might deal with. So then I would bring in a particular person to help me work on that. So my ultimate goal is to understand my client and then seek it out in the great ecosystem that is MRI. They don't need to be the expert on MRI. I don't need to be the expert on all the products, but I need to be the expert on them and how to get them the information and the value and the price and everything they need.
It sounds a lot like, like an IBM kind of thing. It's so big and so variable in terms of what you can serve every market all the time. And then it's like, your job is to make sure that you're understanding the concerns of your specific patch, and that your patch is served by what MRI can solve. Because if they were to go find and try and navigate MRI, they might get lost.
Right. They might get lost. They might not ask the right question. They might not see something that could actually be I hate the word game changer. I hate when people use it, but I'm going to say game changer because I can't think of a better one. A game changer for something that they're doing. And so, that's the type of sale that I like, right?
Mhm.
Is not the one that is, let me be responsible for this one thing to try to like get that, but let me be an advocate for my clients who some of them I've worked with for years, not just at MRI, but previously.
Yeah.
And let me find the value that I'm connected to.
I think what's different from your story versus other stories we've heard is that often we're in the same boat, is that we try and focus a single problem in the market and be known for that single problem. You've got the opposite problem of that, where you can solve many problems, but it's important that people understand how to choose MRI for the problem that they're seeking to solve. Because like if I were to, we have a common question is like, if someone's typing to Google, what would they type in and arrive with MRI? And is there a clean answer for that?
No, I think, historically, look, people are going to think of it as property management software, which it very
Yeah.
well is, right? Your basic book of business, your basic ledger, your basic reporting, basic lead to lease functions, all of
Mhm.
that. But that exists, and that's been, evolved over time, and it's, light years ahead than where it was like 5 years ago. But I think that in general, it is a collection of solutions for real estate professionals
Mhm.
in the broadest sense. And then it's up to a client advocate like myself to understand, what kind of real estate professional are you? Are you are you looking globally,
Sure.
like Greystar? Okay. So then we need to have a different conversation than someone that's maybe just focused in, upstate New York, right? So it's like figuring out what they're looking for, what their challenges might be, what problems they might have, and then finally coming in and saying, hey, here's a few problems I'm thinking of. What are you thinking of?
And
So,
it makes for a different first conversation, right? Because like most people we talk to, and they have a first conversation, it's about solving a specific problem, and we're filtering on prospects based on a specific problem.
right.
Whereas you're filtering on, like, how does that actually? That's the question. How do you
Yeah,
initialize that very first conversation?
that's a great question. Well, I think two things. I think one is, sometimes it is a specific question.
Mhm.
Sometimes there's a particular product that 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 you need to be able to tell this message. So, fraud has become such a popular thing that people talk
Yep.
about. I don't know, there's 100 different companies now that do something in the fraud space. And oftentimes that fraud space is talking about bad actors that are going through the leasing process, bad actors that are going to create fraud for you, that, in some situation. So, but we have a product, Checkpoint ID, that deals with that. But it also deals with the bad actors that happen outside of that process. So the
Mhm.
bad actors that come in on move-in, the bad actors that are a guest on a tour, the bad actors that might be a vendor. So there's a whole like site security piece that we are saying, hey, well, this is great. Like, you don't need to use us for your application. If
Mhm.
if you have another solution that's all integrated, great. But are you still grabbing IDs physically? Are you scanning them at all? Are you doing anything for any? Is it just tours that you're dealing with, or how do you deal with guests or visitors, all this other stuff? So depending on where you live and depending on what your product types are, this might be a very valuable thing. So it's really understanding the kind of the client, the landscape,
Yeah.
and then what problems get solved with or without you, and then what problems are still left undone. So it's like, oh, you're not going to use MRI for this, but you've left two other things on this table. You may want to use MRI to take care of that.
So then is the approach a very, I mean, I can only gather, given you mentioned you've got a patch, you've got an account-based marketing approach to things. And then do you go and figure out, okay, with this patch of customers, here's the problems that they're typically seeking to solve this quarter, next quarter, and then talk to those problems specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's yes. To your point, yes. I think you do research,
Mhm.
right? You go to conferences, you go to where these folks are speaking or presenting or hopping on podcasts or posting online, or you go to where they're putting out content, thought leadership, and kind of getting a base understanding. Then
Yeah.
I think I have the advantage of having been doing this for almost 20 years and knowing a lot of these folks and seeing their trajectory, when this person was a regional over here at this company, they are now a VP of marketing over at a totally different company in a different part of the world. But I have an awareness to say, oh, well, they used to use this and this and this, but this company uses this, so they must be frustrated about this. So maybe there's something I can say there.
Yeah.
So it's taking a lot of knowledge and research, some of which has just been based on longevity, some of which is actively kind of seeking it out, and then coming up with very specific conversation starters or questions when we do have those initial meetings.
Well, I think what's exciting to hear for everyone listening is that we haven't had a lot of account-based conversations on this show. It's been largely about filtering the population, prospecting that's out there, and then filtering on the ABM side of things, or on the prospect side of things. And all of us might do a little bit of ABM, but more so by filtering out the population versus targeting a top 50 and them with specific problems.
Right.
Like, given your background in as a co-founder before, and now in this role, I mean, you've been in this role for a long time. And then I would say, in addition, your additional lens of having the Multifamily Weekly show, like, how do you kind of triangulate those three different the experiences of being at MRI, the experience of being a co-founder or founder, and then having the aperture of everything that comes in through Multifamily Weekly?
Yeah.
Do you triangulate? How do you triangulate? How do you make that an advantage?
That's a cool question. I'm gonna add one more thing that
actually
so maybe quadrangulate, I guess.
Quadrangulate. Let's go with
it. So when PropTech wasn't a real word, I spent a lot of time for a company that was kind of layering on top of the Yardies, the MRIs, the Real Pages of the world, and I went door to door, and I went door to door all over the country, essentially for a decade, like plus. Like, I've pounded pavement in Spokane, Washington, Austin, like anywhere in the country. I've probably been there at one point and talked to a customer. So that kind of foundation of that kind of prospecting, oh, you're a fit, you're a not. I mean, I learned the ICP in a very hard and physically and time-consumingly way. Like, but there wasn't, we didn't have ALN right back then. I mean, it might have existed, but that company wasn't using it at the time, and so there was all these different layers to it. I will say that now in what I see, like through the weekend review and the Multifamily Weekend Update, I think what it allows me to do is I'm not going to shove a product or a solution down anyone's throat, because it's a pendulum. People are always trying to make the best decision for their organization. I'm trying to make the best decision for mine and for the scope and for the clients I serve. I'm not trying to disrupt relationships. I'm not trying to disrupt someone's vision, right? Like, it's a way to challenge it or question it, but just disrupting. If someone wants to do something and go this way, how can I help them do the thing they want to do?
Completely. But you might add clarity to it.
I might add clarity for sure, and I'm happy to add to it. But I think the thing is that at some point, if you're around long enough, you have to become an advocate for the work as a whole. So you can't be team blue or team red or team orange or team purple. You just can't be. You have to be team like everybody, and know your clients and know the product you represent really well. So I think what I've tried to do is create a space where people can feel seen, valued, heard, supported. Do I ever employ the challenger sale? Sure. But it's not necessarily my go-to-market and it's not necessarily my persona, right? Like, I want to listen to somebody, I want to understand them. And so by highlighting them, right, by shining a light on them, by reading what they said, somebody wrote the op-ed or a letter to the editor in their local Kansas City paper, or looking at a new design in the Baltimore, Maryland area where they tapped a mural artist to do the mural outside of the building. Like, those are really specific stories, but it kind of speaks to what is valued, at least within that group, that region, that person, maybe that ownership group, maybe that company. But it gives me a place to start and to meet them where they are. Like, I don't want them to meet them where I am. I want to meet them where they are.
And I think what everyone, like, so it's not heard or the dots aren't connected. Like when you're talking about being team everyone, like you're team everyone for a specific group of accounts.
Yeah.
Like you're not everyone, you're not everything to everybody. You're everything for a specific group of accounts. I just want to make sure that's loud and clear.
Yes. Well, I think it's for me personally, as a professional in space, I'm not cheering on one PMC or one another. I'm not cheering on one ownership group or another thing. Do I want the Texas Apartment Association to be as successful as the Florida Apartment Association? Yes.
Yeah.
They're going to be different, and I find value different in different ones, and I'm happy to say which one I'd rather go to, not on this show, but like, you know, but that's value for me. But I want to use the platform in terms of like reporting on updating events and kind of showcasing people as a really an open space that highlights everybody, because all of us are working to move the industry forward.
Right. And so when you take a look at the problem that they're seeking to solve, and you seek to discover it, because the problem is that. So as I'm consolidating this a little bit more, and given that kind of we usually are specific in our questions, but I like this conversation thread in that it is about the account model, not the problem, not the paint problem model. And that account first, you go figure out the problem they're trying to solve, because you have many tools to choose from an MRI perspective, and it's about narrowing it down to which ones you can solve best. So when you're having that account conversation, how are you able to determine when they're ready to move or commit to change? Like, we had this conversation with Joe Summers, like, how do you capture urgency versus kind of the old way of thinking of creating urgency? So how do you capture it?
Right. That's a great question. I think one of the things is to see what external events are happening for them.
Yeah.
Right. So what changes in their landscape, be it legal, be it financial, be it solution oriented, like
regulatory.
Exactly. Like any of those things can create a space where it's like, I need to make a change, because if I'm doing it this way, I'm going to have an issue. There is within each account, there is kind of like, the subset of, okay, so I'm going to be, solution oriented, problem identifying within that account. But, a great example, a great analogy is like, MRI uses SalesLoft. A lot of companies use SalesLoft. How folks use SalesLoft can vary, right? If you're an account manager versus an account executive where you're prospecting a lot, you're going to use those things same product, but you're using it totally different. So I think that's sort of how we kind of approach it when we're account managers, right? You're looking at the company, and then the suite of products that they could choose from could be totally different, even within that same company. Like one region could use it a certain way, whereas another one could not. So it's a lot of drilling down and niching down. It's just constantly niching down and niching down and niching down, because everyone wants to say, oh, it's one size fits all, or it's one. But there's too many variables in multifamily. There's too many variables.
Well, and it is. I mean, a function of real estate, right? Where you've got like every building is different. I mean, even dial it back to SFR. Every unit is different, and so location persists because everything is unique. And then you layer on that you've got owners and you've got managers and you've got owner managers and you've got staff and vendors and residents, right? Like there's all these different stakeholders that get that. I chipped on this expression. Everyone gets there's a lot of people who have a lot of votes.
Yeah.
Right. And so trying to figure out how to steward those decision making along all the different votes is a complicated situation these days. It was a lot easier to make everybody happy when you could just raise revenue, because even the residents, weren't too fussed by it. But now that strategy is over, and it's like, how do we maintain resident renewals? I mean, just the conversation alone on renewals versus just acquisition. I mean, I can't imagine what the curve might look like with respect to SEO on rental renewal versus acquisition, or solutions for rental renewals versus acquisition. It's got to be a different curve than it's ever been before. So, you brought up an interesting comment around like external events. And this is something that we kind of try and dig in a little bit. it doesn't always land because like, you're pretty obvious about like the external events that are occurring in their lives are forcing that change. So before we kind of jump into that, so when we take a look at internal events or maybe internal benefits, like the conversation of ROI is always valuable and interesting, but not nearly as valuable or interesting as protecting you from risk or helping you with this M&A or helping you with an externally with your financing, with an externally driven compelling event versus an internally driven compelling event.
Right.
How do you filter on those externally driven compelling events versus internal compelling events?
Yeah, another good question. I think the best way to filter is to try to assess impact. Because I think that's the biggest thing, and the impact that's going to create the biggest feeling. Because I think it is dollar cents, numbers, and all of that. But again, to make change, it doesn't. People don't change just because they want to change the number of their budget. If things are working and happening, and they could save a little on one side, I mean, it would have to be a large number. But people don't change just because of like price, right? They change because of how the problem that you're kind of facing and how that feeling is. So whether that's an external change that's creating a problem or an internal change, both are coexist. Which one is, can you solve both of them? Great. Or if they're totally different, which one do you start with first? The one that is the biggest fear, the biggest feeling, the biggest worry, the biggest anxiety, that's the one that you focus on, because that's the one that's going to elicit some kind of connection. Like, yes, I've been thinking about this.
Yeah, like I look at the kind of a very basic metaphor of like sunscreen and umbrellas, right? Like you typically put on sunscreen. Some people put on sunscreen every day. That's part of the population, right? But many people choose to put on sunscreen when it's sunny outside, and many people choose an umbrella when it's raining outside. And their responses to external events that they're seeking to protect against sunburn or wet hair. And like those aren't pain events that people are seeking to adopt a solution for. And so like those two different things, it's the whole like the vitamin versus painkiller conversation, but like recognizing that the external event drives the behavior, because if it was an internal event, you might already have an existing solution that you rely on.
Right.
That now you've got to displace.
Right.
This is also harder.
Right. 100%. Because that might be something, it's a little more in your control. And you're able to, that's the thing, is when people are faced with things that are not in their control, they want to try to control them. So it's, it's that human nature of like, oh, what's the best way I can control this, mitigate this? So things are already kind of feeling like they have control of them, whether or not that's true. If they feel like they have control over them, it's really hard for you to come in and say, oh, you're going to need this, because they feel like they've got it covered. So there has to be, and I think to your point, I think those external things are more obvious smacks in the faces to say, you don't have this covered.
Right. And that's the whole, we're more inclined to adapt respond to sudden changes versus gradual changes. And that's just like human adaptation, right?
Yeah.
So when you take a look at the conversations you're having today, and admittedly, you're one of the very people I can ask this to, where are you feeling more appetite for change? Is it acquisition? Is it operations management? Or is it renewals? Or is it balance sheet? Like, is it like all the mess in the balance sheet? Where are people, giving your customer base, where are you getting more conversations?
Well, I think operations is probably the biggest at the table, is because there is so much uncertainty in the in our political climate about what this means in terms of like regulations, in terms of how certain costs might affect our industry. So I think operations is sort of the kind of the meat and potatoes of it. But I would say that in recent years, the model of renewals is kind of also kind of meeting this model of hospitality, which is the idea that, okay, well, if if this one asset, this one property in, downtown Chicago isn't going to capture renewals at the same rate that it did 2 years ago, can I keep those renewals within a particular brand chain? Because I think that's meeting where the population has changed. A lot of people are wanting to move for their life. They want to live in Chicago for a year, then they want to go to Portland for a while because they're working remotely. It doesn't matter. So I think the idea of renewal is going to change a little bit in the sense of it's like, let's keep you in the network of our brand, so that that's the kind of renewal that I think people are going to start moving to. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's where eyes are looking. And so people are like, how are we going to capture this? How are we going to move to this? What systems can help model this? So I think those are the two biggest ones that I see.
So then I'm curious, is this the brand? So like, and how I characterize what you described, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, was my question's useless, is like, it's kind of like, if you're a Marriott Courtyard person, and you want to go to a higher end, then here's the JW, right? Is that kind of like what you're describing?
Yeah, it could be, right, or a certain level of expectation, right, within a particular within a particular property. So it's that it's that kind of niching down, right? If you're a Marriott, I'm trying to think of one of them. Yes, exactly. If you're a Bonvoy person and you want to go to the the JW, or versus like that's where you want to live all the time, or you want to live at somewhere that's like a suites or something. You could say, hey, you know what? I'm going to camp a lot out west. I don't really care about being home. I'm going there I'm going to live there for 6 months. It's a flexible lease. I'm going to move to this property that's kind of a little lower end, mid-tier out in California, because I'm going to travel a lot. But if you're in New York and you're like going to be in town and it's winter and all that, and you want to be in your unit, you might decide to do a different brand, but it's all under the same chain. I think that the industry will move there, because I think as humans, we're already encouraged to do it, right? We're very, we love our Starbucks app. We love our Delta miles. We love all the things and the tracking of that. And so once the products and the solutions that have come out that are encouraging, renters to stay within a particular group of properties, I think that trend is only going to keep continuing.
So then, the question that kind of comes to mind is that, will the brand, and this may seem obvious, but then I guess there's something to unpack. There's a second level on it that I'm trying to figure out. Will the brand be carried by I can't see how the brand could be carried by the ownership groups. So it's got to be carried by the PMCs, the management companies, just like Marriott, Hilton, et cetera, right?
If they're owner operators. I think if they're third party, then you have them carrying multiple brands, right? If I'm a third party manager, I might work with brand A, B, and C because I'm operating them, and they're the ownership group that has like the different brand. Now, I think I see that as sort of the model, because it's going to have to go to the ownership essentially, and whether they're an owner operator, because I don't know. I think if you're a third party operator, right, you're going to have ownership groups that are competing against each other anyway.
Well, so this is where the hospitality angle is an interesting thread to pull on, because like if you're Marriott, it's ownership groups bid to have you, like the tables turn, right? Like right now, a PMC is looking to find owners to manage their properties, and run their properties, but it's the opposite in hospitality, where like ownership groups are building for a PMC. So imagine you've got a ground operation. Like you might sign a 10-year contract with Greystar. Like let's say I'll put it in hospitality context because it's easier. Yeah. But like if you're building a Hyatt and you've got designs, like Hyatt is helping you build that building, but they don't own the building. But they help you design the building, build the building, all that stuff, and then they run it. They might design it, engineer it. They won't build it. They'll run it afterwards, and that might be a 10-year contract to run that building, maybe even 20-year, right?
Right.
and then whatever, and then it may turn over, who knows. But like right now it's the opposite. That doesn't happen that way. Whereas an owner would have a 10-year contract with a lender, 20-year contract, a mortgage lender for financing, and then they seek management companies, and they flip management companies fairly frequently because they don't have that connective tissue. So I'm not framing my question very well, but I'm still trying to figure it out. Like, do we really? Is it really like, while the ideas of hospitality would come through, something that is that fundamental in terms of who is the lead dog? Like right now, the owner is the lead dog. In hospitality, the operator is the lead dog. Do you think that that's going to shift? Do you think that could shift or will shift, or how will that shift?
Well, I think it will shift. I mean, I think here's the thing that's happening, right? So you're having smaller companies, smaller ownership operator groups that are merging in with larger companies. You're having more consolidation of owner operators. So, a third party manager, most of them that I work with also own. So they don't just third party, but they have a particular, so they particularly own. So I think it's a matter of identifying what vertical within their portfolio would be most brandable. So I think I think it would go more after the ownership side of it, which is like, I don't think it's set up that way. I don't think it's necessarily set up that way right now, but I think, Trammell Crow, right? It's a great example. You build a property, it's an Alexan. It's an Alexan property. It's always been an Alexan. So when they build a property, it's Alexan this, Alexan that. That's a brand. That's a brand. So if I'm living in Atlanta and then I move to, Seattle and I see an Alexan and I had a great experience at another Alexan, two different third party, Avenue 5 and Greystar might be managing them separately on different, but the brand is still the same. So I think it's going to follow probably with an ownership group, but then that complicates all the stuff, right? Which is how do you track loyalty with that? Because if you're using two completely, opposite systems,
and the whole like centralized. So in that context, in my mind, you're competing on service, and competing on service means you got centralized training, you got like the Ritz-Carlton model, right? Like, or Seasons model, where you've centralized experience, and a way to do things is that certain way. I mean, I get what you're getting. It's still, I don't know. It seems to me there's a lot of disconnects for it to actually turn around that way.
Well, I think this is why we've been talking about it for the last, 6 or 7 years, at least in my memory, 8 years. Like I've heard the hospitality thing, more and more. But I think that we're starting to kind of meet the tipping point of the population, which is population is now more adept at moving around. I'm older, right? So like back in my 20s, I didn't necessarily want to move all over the country. I couldn't, right? I had my job. My job was in Boston. Then I had a job in New York. I had to live in those metro areas. That is not the general population now for so many folks that are going to be becoming probably long-term renters. So the idea is how do you capture, like, I did not want to move in Boston. I think I ended up moving 4 times in my 6 years there. I could have done with like 2 times, but I think people are now they're more minimalist in the stuff that they have. They are ready to move out of an apartment a lot easier. They don't need, I've talked to some people that actually rent, and that, some younger friends of mine that live in Atlanta, that's their model. They're like, no, I want to be here. And then I probably next year I'll move somewhere else. And it's like a different mindset. So I think we're starting to have the population that is going to be more like there's an appetite for the idea of a hospitality chain, because that's the easy thing, right? If I can easily sign a lease virtually and go through all the steps and have, can get verified, easily with, fraud and all of that, all on my phone from my apartment in Boston, and then start leasing an apartment in Seattle, that particular flow is going to be the modern day renewal, most likely.
And what's interesting about that experience, right, is that implies that, your brand is consistent across all those different experiences, which
Yeah.
I think right now it's very fragmented.
It is. It is. I mean, and I think that's why I think, ownership is more involved in the types of data to like circle back to the data thing, which is the ownership wants the data across all of it. So they want to see how well this third party or themselves, if they're owner and operating, are doing across multiple regions so that they can start creating consistency at the levels in which that they're trying to achieve.
Well, because they're the ones that are vulnerable to renewal revenue, because if renewal revenue doesn't actually come through and it's not in their control, but they're the ones that are accountable for that financing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Otherwise, they're writing the checks to their LPs are writing checks or GPs are writing checks. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So then that brings back the argument for MRI and a consolidated way of looking at all the data, right, from the ownership perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's, being able to have a master view of it versus, oh, well, it's in this region managed by this company, and then over here it's managed by that company, and so the data is all different. And then how do you have something that kind of pulls all that together? That's what MRI can do. That's what we're keeping perfecting. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting close. It's ahead of the game for a lot of stuff, and that's where all the clients I work with are talking about, like, how can they get this better data so they can basically serve their client, or if they're owner operators, serve themselves. Like, they want to be able to access that stuff.
Do you, so when you're going out there and you're having the conversations and things are getting down funnel, I mean, what kind of objections do you hear? Like, especially in the account-based marketing kind of like model, like what do you typically hear and how do you respond to those?
Sure. I think the most common objection is, something that a particular solution that's being, decided at maybe the C-suite or below, that is like trying to encompass all this data, but then you're working with a group that needs this other thing that particular thing doesn't have. What are the obstacles against those two things working either tangentially alongside each other or integrated? And so it's kind of that. It's that there's too much tech. I think Don Beveridge wrote about this recently about like the bloated tech stack. And I'm not for like a single stack solution. I don't think that's the answer for most clients. Maybe those 1,000 units, to your point. But I do think that reducing where there's a lot of different kinds of overlap and then seeing where there's gaps. I think people can't see the gaps because they already see too much overlap. So it's just kind of like they're blocking out everything else. They're just like, this is too much, but they still have gaps. They do. I've seen it. So it's like,
and some solutions, they could, I mean, even our solution, like there's certain things that we're best in the world at, and there's certain things that we also can do. And I always talk about the also can do stuff as stuff that we want to make sure we are not hurting ourselves, but at least we don't exclude ourselves from the competition.
Right.
But we also can do this, but that's not what we go to market for.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. And so when you're thinking back of all the things that you've learned in the last 20 plus years, and think of yourself as even your years as a founder, like what bit of advice would you give yourself, or would you give even someone who's coming into your group at MRI in order to try to find that hell yes buyer?
I think it comes from improv. So I told you I had a theater background. So I think it comes from improv, which is in improv, you're never supposed to say no, right? Which would be great for us salespeople if no one ever said no. But when you encounter the no, if somebody says, no, I think it's then saying yes and to that. Okay, accept the no, but then what's next? Accept the no, but when else can we talk? Or accept the no, but what about this? So I think rather than spend so much time challenging the no, and then you should challenge and you should poke holes in and you should compete. But if the no is a no, make sure to say yes and. I think that's my advice.
I love that. That's outstanding. I was on a drive yesterday and I was listening to Tom Segura, who's a comic. I think it's Segura. Anyways, he was talking a lot about his era and Growlings in LA.
Okay. Yeah.
And the improv and how that rolls into his comedic writing. It was like Huberman was the podcast. And he
Okay.
was on there talking about the science and development of his comedic approach. And a lot of it had to do with his observation of humanity in his time in the Growlings and Second City or whatever.
Yeah.
So interesting tie-in from those experiences, because certainly the reaction, and I just kind of like play back what I heard. When you get a no, that's a pain, and so it's we're conditioned to respond to that pain, laser focused, fight or flight. And your advice is to pause, take a breath, and acknowledge the no, and open up the conversation for another conversation.
Yeah. Sit in the pain, sit in the failure, sit in the whatever is in your mind, and then ask yes and this, because I think if you are going to sell in this industry beyond a couple years, you're going to run into the same kinds of people. So the same people, literally. So you don't want to be the person that's forcing a hell yes, and then you end up getting a hell no. Like, you don't want a hell no. You just want to know. And then I think you get the hell yes when you just keep that asking for the next thing. And I will say it's true in every single role person. Like, I've seen, I could list off 10 of them that happened this year that pop in my head, but it's the yes and that you have to do, even when there's a no.
I think that's brilliant guidance. That's the first time I've heard that. I love it. Thank you so much, Justin.
Welcome.
All right, everybody. And a couple of things close out. So how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way?
I think LinkedIn at this point. DM me on LinkedIn or message me. I'm on it a lot. So that's the best way. Follow me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And if you do have any questions or comments about this chat, you're listening to it not live, shoot on there. We'll both get notifications, be able to jump on that. And then who should we talk to next?
Oh, you're talking to somebody that I would have suggested already, like I think next week or something. Let's see, who should you talk to next? I guess somebody that I kind of follow and admire a lot of what they say. You haven't had Joseph Knack on yet, right?
I've had Joseph Knack. Yeah.
Well, then I don't know. You've had all the good ones. I don't know. I'll get back to you on that.
All right.
You've had too many of the good.
Joseph's a beauty, man. I met him. Him and I connected. Of course, he's working with Adrian Dilley on, and him and I connected at NMHC, and then I had him on the show like the following week, and then Joe Summers obviously on like a couple weeks back when I was at TAA, so a couple weeks back. And it was great to have both those guys on from Gatewise.
Yeah.
And, are you going to go to NAA in a few weeks?
I will be at NAA. Yes, I will be there. So I'll be at the MRI booth, and I'll be doing stuff with the Multifamily Media Network and Media Update. And so I will be around. So I look forward to seeing you. You'll be there too?
Yeah, I'll be there.
I'll see you there then. Yeah.
I look forward to seeing you there as well. Okay, well, we'll still hit you up for another name to keep the thread going. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, brought to you by RCX, remote maintenance for multifamily, helping you stop spending on blind trips and dispatching trucks that don't need a roll. If you are listening to the podcast, obviously we'd love it when everybody links or subscribes and downloads. That makes a huge difference in terms of findability and searchability, all those good things. Leave comments if you got them. Rate us if you get prompted. And if you need to ask some questions, shoot me a DM. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Justin, for your time today. This was super insightful. Yes, and that's going to be the close on that. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful day. That was good.